Can you hear me now? All right, cool. So, obviously this is this project here, and I made this because I wanted a quick and dirty Git repo that had a split back and front end project. Hopefully not going to spend too much time on the JSON part. This all kind of works, though it doesn't do anything right now. And just as an example using console.log so I can demonstrate the GCJSI support. No, actually we're going to be looking at the back-end part, the Yesod app. Right now the Yesod app is best described as vestigial. It doesn't do anything. So I use Yesod just kind of out of habit because it's what I use at work. But yeah, it needs stripped down a bit. There's stuff in there that I'm not using. There's stuff I'm never going to use, and there's some workflow stuff I wanted to demonstrate. So my workflow for my actual day-to-day work is a bit different from most Haskellers, I think. One reason for that is that we use JCJS on the front end and Haskell on the back end. Another reason is that we use a monorepo that has a shared library for all of the Haskell apps, for models and stuff like that. We're actually going to create a separate kind of non-database entities library pretty soon to share with the front end, because we're not going to share the stuff that does the database layer with the front end app. It's not that we couldn't. We could. It's just too much to pull in. So with that in mind, I don't really use gcmod. I don't really, I mean, intro seems to work quite a bit better than gcmod, but there are still some little infelicities in how it behaves, especially if, so our backend web app, the main project I work on, it depends on that database entities library, right? But if I change the database entities library, I have to manually like kill intro or gcmod or whatever it is I'm trying to use with like IDE-ish functionality. I keep having to kill that thing over and over to reload the dependency, right? So it's a bit easier for me to just live in a REPL and just have Emacs next to it. So, you know, except for the fact that for whatever reason it missed some dependencies when I built it, just doing stack GCI, stack REPL, whatever, next to Emacs ends up being more reliable. So this Yesod app is, if you've ever done the Yesod scaffold or stack template, it's like pretty familiar. It's got 4 different handler modules. Actually, I should show you a better way to start getting a grip on a Yesod app. Really, where you want to start is in the config subdirectory, and then go to routes, because that should, if they haven't done something unusual, should actually be a listing of all the routes. So we've got the static route. You almost never need to touch this. It's just your static assets. So, oh, okay, I see. I made it mad. All right then. So this is actually worth explaining. So if we bounce over to Foundation, we have CSS, Bootstrap, CSS. Okay. So the reason it's mad is that the routing for Yesod generally is statically typed. It actually checks that the files that you generate static routes for, it checks that they're actually in the project directory. It won't compile without them. So in this case, the syntax is a little bit weird to people at first, but what this CSS underscore bootstrap underscore CSS represents is this. It represents this file. And then since it's a static, it expects it to be located there, right? But if we look in static, it only has JSEXE. Just for the sake of getting this to build, I think I ended up nuking this when I was messing around with the JCJS stuff. Because if you look in static JSEXE, it's a symlink over to the front end app. And that's so that I can rebuild the front end app and not have to manually copy assets over. I can just recompile front end, reload web app. The right assets are there already. Okay, so since it's cranky, go ahead and rerun the build. Now, I'm not actually a fan of the add style sheet thing. I don't really do that. I prefer to just put the static routes in the template. But we'll take a look at the default layout wrapper, get an idea of what's going on here. So, yeah. So this is just the script tag for all the JS. I could actually make this a static route. Oh, yeah, here's another thing that catches beginners. This is a good thing to cover. So you see how we got the same compilation error? Kind of annoying, right? So you don't really want to put this in a build script, but anytime you are stuck like this, usually what you need to do is touch settings.hs and then rebuild, because it essentially doesn't rerun the template haskell that lets it know that the files are actually there unless the settings module has been touched. It's kind of annoying. I'm not going to make any excuses for that, but I'd still rather have the build break seriously than the other way around. Okay, so for the sake of giggles, let's just go ahead and turn this into a static route. So we just turn the slash and the dot to that, and then to create a URI reference, we just use the @ sigil in front of the mustaches, and then rerun the build. And in this case, it knew that I had changed the files because I modified the default layout wrapper Hamlet file. The static assets is just kind of a special case. And a built. So if I, what did I put in my make file here? Not too much. Okay. So I'll go ahead and rerun stack REPL. And I'm going to kill my Slack because I don't really want anybody messaging me. I'm going to reopen Safari and go back to the chat so I can see if you... Actually, I will open chat on the other machine. Okay. Just Alexi commenting on the annoyingness of killing JSON intro. Yeah, it is. Okay, so, alright, given that I tend to favor a REPL-driven workflow, I like something that's reliable, right? So, because we have this somewhat involved build at work, Yesod Devel doesn't really work, which is kind of unfortunate because that's the magic auto reloader that just reloads your web app and keeps it running whenever you edit a source file. You can actually get most of the way there. In the Yesod scaffold, you're going to find this module under app, no, not application, called devel main. And it has some helper code in there. It's really handy. It's called update. And you notice the comment is start or restart the server. So all you have to do after loading devel main, you'll notice that automatically migrated and created the SQLite database. It's an eager beaver. And then I should be able to open, should be able to open this guy. And then if I, let me see here, I've actually forgotten how to open DevTools on Safari because I use it so rarely. Where's the, yeah, there we go. Show Web Inspector. And there you go. So there's a secondary benefit to using the static routes. You'll notice when we change it to using static R, it automatically slaps an E tag on it for cache validation, which if you've ever been bitten by over-aggressive caching while deving on front-end resources, let me tell you, that one pays off. So it's definitely worth using the static R route for any kind of internal front-end assets whenever possible. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and nuke that. That's gone. And then for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to reload, update, reload. Didn't work. All right. Question is, oh, there it goes. It's recompiling foundation now. Shouldn't have had to have restarted the REPL, but I'm just kind of winging it, so I'm not going to dig into why. Okay. There we go. Now I just have the one script. Next step, I'm going to remove the this thing. I mean, I may put some. Okay, so when I added the foundation source file, it looks like it recompiled it properly. And then if I do update again, reload. Yep, there we go. Bootstrap is gone. And I have no earthly idea what that is, or where that's coming from. I don't really do front end much. Can you tell? And don't really need that. Okay, yeah, so it didn't detect that the files changed, so to save myself having to kill the REPL, I just touched foundation, so it detected it properly. I haven't actually noticed that problem before, so I don't know exactly where it's coming from. Sorry, I can't be more informative. Okay. So, the terminology in Yesod is, alright, so I called it this is the default layout wrapper. So, the way Hamlet templates are structured is kind of inverted from what you might be used to in Django or Jinja templates. Instead of inheriting from parent templates and then injecting content, Hamlet templates behave more like functions. They just have a context. In this case, this PC variable is supposed to be page content. So you can see here it's injecting page body content, and it's grabbing the copyright from the master setting, the app settings of the master app in context. So that's all flipped around. If you're not used to that, it could take a little bit of time to figure it out. Coming from Django, Jinja, style templates, from Closure, where you find a lot of the same thing, it took me a little bit to get used to that, but now it's not too big of a deal. If you're wondering what this noise is, this is to set up the CSRF token for AJAX requests. If I get as far as messing with GCJS, I'm probably going to have to reuse that in order to be able to make an AJAX post against the backend web app, because Yesod helpfully enables CSRF protection by default. So, and that doesn't just apply to form encoded posts, it applies to any post against a protected endpoint, which is going to be all of them by default. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and just kill that, because my goal isn't really to keep the app running, it's actually just start ripping things out. So there's the database that it created. In case you're wondering, the original template that the backend app was built from is right there. Yesod SQLite. So when I originally made it, I did stack, new backend, Yesod SQLite, and that made this little project. Alright, so I don't really object to the use of SQLite for this, because I don't really want to force people to set up MySQL or Postgres just to tinker with this. So that part's fine, and it's a SQL database, so it's close-ish. I use Postgres at work pretty much always, but what are you going to do? Okay, so another thing in config is the models, and right now that's user, email, and comment. I'm actually going to just kill, well, no, here, I'll leave them there, but they're all going to go away. I don't care about that. I'm going to turn into a dumb API counter here in a moment. Oh, and for the record, you don't actually have to put your models in this kind of one-off file thing like the routes file. You don't actually have to do that. I have so this is an example from the work project. We're still using the quasi-quote syntax for defining models, but it's inside a normal Haskell module, so that ends up being what you want. Maybe it's even worth getting rid of it, since you don't really want to keep using it like that. Yeah, we'll get rid of it. Okay, so config models by, let's see what breaks. Yes, it's very upset. Okay, so in model.hs, it looks like, yeah, it just uses persist file with, let's see, okay. Well, we're not going to do that. Oh, let me see here. Any questions? No? Nothing. All right. Rather than use my work code, I'll just go and take a look at what's in the persistent box. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, so we're going to do it like this. This guy right here. And there we go. Gonna change it in a moment, but yeah, that's good enough. And we're gonna need stuff. It's not clear to me you actually need. Yeah, so this is another general principle of working on Haskell apps that I find pretty valuable. I don't know if any of you have ever read folklore.org. It's anecdotes and stories from early Apple, mostly around the development of the Macintosh. And one of my favorite anecdotes, I don't know if it's titled this, but a catchphrase in it is make a mess, clean it up. And Haskell lets me actually get away with that in code. I can get away with making a mess in the sense that now the original story is about something different. It's about getting better at something by dealing with a more stressful situation than a serious run would involve. But what I mean here is that I just nuked the models because persistent is type safe. Any references to those models, to the fields, anything that the code is depending on from the original models file, that now breaks, as you can see. So I can just break things, change things, and as long as all my types weren't just, text, int, I'm able to just treat the compiler as like a checklist. Okay, so let's start fixing that. All right. So yes, this is another issue with the scaffolds where I don't really agree with the way they do things. So I understand why they include it, but I don't really use Yesod auth, I should say. Yeah, I end up having to work around something in Yesod auth, so I usually just don't. So I'm just going to comment that out and see what happens. I've already ripped it out of my work project, I just don't really remember. Maybe I remember what all I did to do so. So yeah, so Yesod auth persist depends on Yesod auth for the same app, so we're just going to comment that out too. And do our little up arrow enter deal and do it again. Yeah, Michael Borden made a point that it's nicer to get editor support when editing your models. Yeah, it is. Not that Emacs is that brilliant about what's going on inside of a quasi-coder, because it can't really know, but yeah, it does still look and work better, especially if you need to write helper data types, helper instances, random functions, things like that. Okay, so now it's complaining about handler comment. We actually have a solution for that. Bye. Don't care. I'm not going to use you. It's mad. Alright, so This is one of those things where, for pretty silly reasons, you get a bad error. So it's saying can't find source for. Okay, fine. So the first thing we're going to try is stack clean, stack build. All right, fair enough. Same result. So let's go to the Cabal file, search for handler.comment, send the exposed modules. Not anymore. Run again. All right. All right. There you go. Okay. That's weird. I thought I already edited that out. Looks to be gone now. Here we go. Alright, so project uses a package.yaml. And when you use a package.yaml, it means you're using HPack. And if you're using HPack, you don't edit your Cabal files. They get generated. Derp. Sometimes I forget. Alright, cool. Now we have a proper error. So whenever you have a build error that doesn't include actual compiler feedback like this, it's usually a problem in your Cabal file or your package.yaml. When you start getting real compiler errors again, like this, that's actually GC. That's a real thing. Alright. Config, routes, and we'll just go ahead and remove this. So I'm going ahead and removing it from the routes before I've gotten the error because I know it's going to complain. If you put a route in here that you haven't implemented, it'll squawk at you and throw an error. Okay, so here's another one. This is a good one. So going back to the whole Yesod routes and type safe thing. So the home page routes is a widget file called homepage. When you see widget file in your head, you should say template. And what it means is templates homepage.hamlet. And then you'll see not in scope data constructor common R. So what that means is that something in the template wanted to make a reference to or generate a URL from a route named comment R, but none is in scope because we nuked it. So all you really have to do here is search for, missing. All right, I see how it is. Interesting. Okay. Okay. This is another good one for you to know about. So, the actual reference to common R was in the Ajax code. Julius is kind of like Hamlet. It's part of the same Shakespearean family of templates. Has all the same kind of facilities, it's just designed for JavaScript instead of HTML. Anyway, again, type safe routing. Ajax code wants to make use of the route, but there's nothing actually there. So we're actually going to solve this by getting rid of the Julius file, and we're going to massively strip this down. And put just that for now. So another thing to notice, Hamlet uses Hamel style syntax, if you ever encountered that. So tags wrapping around other tags is based on nesting, and you don't actually have to put the terminal tag in there, and then DOS syntax is just automatically going to add that class to the tag. You don't have to write class equal quote, so on and so forth. You don't want to. Okay. Yeah, so this little defenestration process is something that I end up doing with just about every Yesod scaffold I end up using for a real project. So yeah, it was importing text.julius because it was using that Julius template. And we're not actually going to do that. So, all right, now it's squawking about the absence of Yesod auth. Okay, this is where my not having checked for how I got rid of auth in a previous app might bite me. This might be the moment. Yep, okay. Alright, I give up. Show me what I did differently. So, auth, nope. So, auth, nope. I definitely completely nuked it from that project. So, presumably there's something somewhere still pulling it in. Let's get rid of auth. Yeah, I have a suspicion. Yeah, it's looking promising, so I don't want that. And now it's complaining that comment text area ID is not available. I know that. Yep. Yep. Nope. So there are some clever things in Yesod that I'm fond of and that I like, and there are some clever things that I'm less fond of. One is that it automatically, given a widget file of a given name, in this case homepage, it'll automatically stitch the Hamlet for the HTML, the Lucius for the CSS, and the Julius for the JS into a single template or view, because it knows enough about your the structure of your templates enough to automatically inject that stuff. And I'm not really a fan of that. I like the way Shakespearean templates work at a lower level, but it's not something I'm personally keen on, so I end up ripping a lot of this stuff out. And by a lot, I mean all of it. Also, if anyone has any questions, by all means, please ask. I've got the chat open to my right here, just so I can do that. Yeah, there we go. It built now. There's some stuff we could probably rip out still, but yeah, it's fine. So, get rid of the form. Let's rip it all form stuff for now. And this is an example of Yesod form. I think this is another situation where they're being more elaborate than is really needed for a scaffold, but they're using a special bootstrap-oriented renderer. Now, to be fair, this is something you're going to need to know when you write your own forms for a real web app. So usually, at least in most commercial apps I've worked on, you end up wanting your own special form markup so that your designer has enough divs and stuff to work with to design the forms in whatever the house style is. So this part here, these are just declaring fields for a form. You know, like this one's just a form upload input. Arec here is just a way of saying it applicatively requires a text field, and it's using a small input widget, and then there's like no default or whatever that maybe value is. I can never remember. And then it's just structuring those inputs into a tuple when it succeeds. Anyway, a form applicative/monad includes the possibility of failure, as you might imagine. That's actually what I had been removing there. I'm not going to bring it back up, but there's a form success and form failure, and the form failure includes, you know, errors, things like that. Realistically, that's been abstracted out these days into the validation applicative, which you can find here at the validation package, where you've got ACK validation, or in the either library. Yeah, so the validation I added is still there, and it's a little bit more stripped down, but it works fine. So validation is just an either that accumulates errors instead of short-circuiting on the first error, and you need that for forms for pretty obvious reasons. If your user makes more than one mistake, you want to return all the errors and tell them all at once. And Kareem asks, what is text.jasmine? Sorry I didn't see this earlier. I need to backtrack a little bit to figure out where you saw that. Let's find out together. Okay. So, rather than just tell you, we will just step through how I figure out everything like this. So, what I do is I type in Haskell, I copy and paste the module name in quotes, I click the first package result that comes up for it, and then, so the description here says Haskell implementation of a JavaScript minifier. And it looks like minify M is a minifier that it can explicitly fail. And if it fails, it'll return left. If it succeeds, it'll return right. So it's just a JavaScript content minifier. It takes byte string and spits out a byte string if it succeeds. In this case, I've ripped out everything that it was using it, but here, hold on, there we go. So yeah, there you go. So they're just putting a minifier in the pipeline here. All right, so more kind of slightly Baroque stuff that doesn't strictly speaking, need to be in the scaffold. And part of the reason I don't think this stuff should be in the scaffold is that I'm sure this is what FP Complete does, but most companies I've worked at, even ones that use Haskell, the front-end devs have their own thing going, you know? They have their own tools, they are using Browserify or whatever, you know, asset rollup pipeline that they're using. Trying to include it in the framework or the Haskell backend app, or whether it's a framework or not, it's not really compelling for me. I just don't care. And I don't really want to try to do that in the backend app. I'd rather keep them separate anyway and just have the assets be the result of some, you know, build script. Just push them up to the CDN. In fact, I think the asset pipeline is one of the bigger kind of boondoggles of Rails, but I'm sure there's a Rails dev out there that'll disagree with me. But anytime I have to, the rare occasion I have to touch a Rails app, it's half the time it's the asset pipeline that drives me fucking crazy. Alright, so we're going to ignore that because we don't really care about that. Bring our REPL back up. If you have any more questions, go ahead and ask. Dum-de-dum-de-dum. Dum-de-dum. Oh, you know, I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Anyway, the point I was making about the form widget thing is just that you will end up making your own form widget, but there's no real reason to, I mean, I don't know. Unless you're going to actually walk them through how this thing was implemented on top of the underlying form stuff, there's no real point in showing them the custom form generator. Okay. App develop, that's my opinion. I'm sure some people feel differently, but I don't find that anybody... Part of the problem with using the custom form thing is they don't actually have the implementation in the code where you can learn from it. Instead, it is buried in this module, which is actually curiously in the Yesod form library, which again, not really something I'd put in a form library. Maybe in like a form extras library or something. So yeah, since it's in a library, beginners don't read library code ever, so they're never going to see it, so there's no point. Alright, so we're going to get rid of that and get rid of these comments. Doesn't really need this explained to me, I think. Alright, launch the app, reload. Okay, there we go. It's a fair bit simpler now, and now the markup has a measure of resemblance to what we actually expect. Right? Right. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an API route. Let me see here. I just want like a silly counter thing. So I'll start with API just to demarcate it from the any other routes I might add, and then I'll put v1 in there because the hell with REST. We'll just put our versions in their path, and we'll just call it count. And count will have a get and a post method. Okay, so first things first, I've added that route. And once again, stack REPL not seeing changes. That's fine. I'll just run stack build, that'll be fine. Yeah, so it's recompiling foundation because you can see the reason, it tells you right there, because config routes changed. And it's complaining because get count R and post count R are not in scope. Well, we know that. We haven't written them yet, right? So touch handler, I wouldn't really make a module for like every single collection of handlers, module handler.api. And then, so one of the things I do keep from the scaffolds and that I end up extending is this idea of an import module. This saves me a tremendous amount of time. It's sometimes a little bit hard to figure out when you actually want when you want import.hs versus import/nofoundation.hs, because you kind of have to figure out your import dependencies as far as, does this need to know what specific app I'm actually building? Does it need to know the concrete type, or does it just need to know it's a Yesod application? But I spend very little time on that. And what's nice about the import module is it brings in a bunch of things. So this is just pulling in two different things. The foundation module itself, which is basically the definition of our app type, which has things like our app settings, static file surveys, database connection pool, HTTP client connection manager, and our logger. Standard kind of app config context stuff. And then import no foundation has a bunch of helper imports. So in this case, we're using Classy Prelude because this is Yesod. It's a Snoiman style thing, so he's going to use Classy Prelude. I'm not going to go into Classy Prelude unless somebody is super interested in that, but suffice to say, it brings in pretty much all the standard stuff you need to just write an endpoint. Because if you don't have this, let me see if I can just make the point here. So, okay. So we're going to change home to count, handler to... So, okay, this is another thing. A lot of people don't notice this at first, but so when you're writing Yesod web apps, you're doing everything in terms of the handler monad. Handler is itself actually a monad transform. You don't usually have to worry too much about the underlying details. So when we were in the home handlers, it's handler HTML. And the type argument to handler here is the type of content we're returning, right? So we can actually return text, and we would be returning just text, not something the browser would render as HTML. We can also return value, which is JSON, not, in fact, I'll just literally return a JSON value here. And then I'm going to do the same for this guy. And then I'm going to show you how I test this kind of thing, because I think it's kind of convenient. And it's a tool that a lot of people use. So let me see if it's in the App Store real quick. But looking for is Postman. Have any of you use Postman? How common is it to use a custom prelude was the question. Ooh, man. So in libraries, I try not to. Hey, there is a Mac app. That's awesome. Nice. All right. How common is it to use custom prelude? In libraries, I try really hard not to, because there's rarely a good reason to. Industrial applications, I don't remember the last time I haven't used custom prelude. I get the impression that it's common. I think the real split is whether it's Classy Prelude / Snoiman style versus the long tail of other options. Classy Prelude is probably the most popular, but I wouldn't bet on it being the majority because Classy Prelude takes a little bit of time to figure out. Although some of the newer preludes are actually starting to move towards a design like Classy Prelude. And I'll show you an example from that. So it describes itself as a type class based prelude. I would say that that's technically true, but not super helpful to a beginner. The example I want to show you here, oh, they split out that dependency, didn't they? You probably did. Okay, data.io. Data. Yeah, it's in chunk data now. Okay, so one of the things Classy Prelude pulls in is a class called IO data, so that, let me just do stack REPL here, and I'll show you what I mean. So there's pluses and minuses to this. I wouldn't really shove it on a complete beginner, but for the work I do, it's nice. So there's a couple things to keep in mind here. So one thing is obviously that this is pre-lifted. I don't have to lift IO this. It's already been pre-lifted. You wouldn't pre-lift things like this in a library because you need to let people decide how to lift things themselves. You don't want to really do it for them. I mean, you can provide like a convenience library of pre-lifted versions of things. A good example of that would be, so you've got the async library and everything is just IO, right? And that's good, that's fine. That's really what the base library should be. But then there's lifted async. I got the name of it wrong. And lifted async you need anytime you're using monad base control lifted IO actions. And since they're kind of annoying to write, having this pre-lifted API is pretty handy. If you're a beginner, stay the hell away from monad base control if you can help it. Figuring out how to either write an instance or make use of lifting functions or rewrite unlifted versions in terms of the lifted functions is generally a bit of a tar baby, so stay away from it if you can. Okay, so if you look at getLine, you'll see that the result of our lifted IO action is IO data. So one of the complaints people have about Haskell for industrial work is that the prelude's all in terms of strings, which are just lists of cars, which isn't really what you want for performance reasons. So IO data generalizes into strict and lazy byte string and strict and lazy text. So now I can get line, and if I tell it I expect text, it'll be text, and if I tell it I expect a byte string, whoops, I shadowed it. That was a mistake. I meant to write my BS. Anyway, you get the idea. So now it's just whatever type I need it to be. However, there is a problem with this. If you don't specify the type you expect, it ends up being ambiguous. Kind of like if you tried to read a string. Oh, it doesn't even, the classic really gets rid of read because it's partial and not really good. Take it for granted that, you know, if I do import, prelude, read, string, oh, it defaulted because it's GCI. Okay. Take it for granted that normally if I wasn't in the REPL, that would have been an ambiguous type, just as this one was, because it needed a concrete type to actually run that type class instance. Okay, so getting back to the code. All right, so purportedly Postman has a Mac application. Let's go ahead and install that. And while we're at it, we'll go ahead and load our app. And probably going to need to, yeah, so you see how it says it's still not in scope? So whenever you add a new module of handlers, you are going to import it here. And I like to alphabetize these bad boys, so do it like that. Reload. All right. Now we get back to why we have to do import. In all of my projects, and this includes the Yesod scaffolds, in default extensions, you're going to find no implicit prelude. So the reason stuff like string or return isn't in scope is because literally nothing is in scope in this module. No implicit prelude means that there's no implicit that going on. Now I could do it manually to bring the prelude back, but it still doesn't know about all this other stuff. Values from the JSON library. Handler is part of my application. It's basically a concreted handler T that knows about my specific app type. And I don't actually know why it doesn't know what a string is at this moment, but because it's a data constructor, not the type. And that's from JSON as well. Yeah, now compiled. Okay, cool. So now we run into the usual dilemma. So this works fine. You'll notice the little app logging occurs in your GCI. You can ignore that. You hit enter to get past it. It doesn't break anything. Okay, we want to actually test our API here. See some results. So I'm going to fire up application downloaded from the internet. Isn't that just wild, Apple? Alright, come on. Nope, go away. Alright, localhost 3000. So the nice thing about Postman is it lets you accumulate these little convenient ways to poke your app. Now, to be clear, this does not replace proper unit testing or whatever you want to call it. This is more for like super early poking, if you will. So what we're going to do is go ahead and type in our route here. Okay, so API v1 count, and then send. And that was our response. The string get count R. Incidentally, by the way, don't know if you know this, so this isn't actually a valid JSON response. In case any of you haven't run into this before, the only valid top-level type of value you're permitted to have in JSON, it doesn't have to be an API, it's just any JSON, it has to be an object or an array. So to make this correct, I would technically have to make it a vector, a string, or an object or something. And I will show you how to do that in just a moment as soon as I change my music here. Alright, so let's make it valid JSON. One thing to notice, you can inspect the cookies, the headers, all that fun, happy stuff. So it's including a set cookie header to set the, cookie. It's letting you know the server is warp 3.2.7. It's not too surprising. Yesod uses warp. And the content type is application/JSON. So it's another kind of nice thing here is that Yesod's automatically setting the car set in the content type for you. It's handy. So you don't have to worry about that. And you can make your own instances for types that are two-typed content or whatever it is. And we can actually load a little API module here and get the type of get count R. We already know it's handler value. And then we can do info on handler to find out more about it. So this is another thing you'll want to get used to when you're writing Haskell applications, just using info in the REPL to figure everything out. So in this case, handler is just an alias for handler t app.io, which is what I said. I said it was just the handler monitoring sort of specialized to your application type. So when it says app here, what it means, and this is a kind of Yesod design principle that you're going to see over and over, you design and custom application type for your web app. It's not something that comes from Yesod. It just happens to be baked into the scaffold for, to show you an example of something that works. The app has type class instances that define basically the behavior of the Yesod application. So, for example, the Yesod persist type class here, that's giving you the means to run DB, which is basically a way to run database actions, queries, inserts, read, write, whatever, in the context of that app. It's basically doing a couple things for you. It's threading around the database connection pool for you, so you don't have to manually pass that around or manage that. The second thing it's doing is it's giving it a means of running I/O in the context of your handler app, your handler T, whatever. So it's essentially pre-lifting it for you in addition to being a reader. So this is part of what I'm talking about. Like, this is a very, it's not quite on the nose MTL style, but it's that kind of idea where you define a class for a facility, and then you just define a type or a monad or whatever that has the facility it is you need. This is partly why I don't really feel the need for fancy effect systems, because my effects are already enumerated by my type class constraints. This isn't the best example of that. Again, better would be something like monad BH in the Bloodhound library, but we won't go into that for now. There's actually a monad handler, which is more like a proper MTL style, and that's abstracting out the set of Yesod app things, and you can use that for it just lifts handler T actions into whatever monad you've got, but in practice it's just, you know, a generalized class of Yesod app context. So presumably in that case you wouldn't, if you're using, you know, monad handler, it's really tantamount to saying handler T and then some site, and you just don't know what the site is. You don't need to worry about any of this. Sorry, I'm getting a little afield here. All right, so handler.api. We're going to go ahead and check that we've got object in scope, and we do. Object takes a list of ASON pairs and turns into a value. The value in this case is a JSON object. So, I'm going to use our trusty dusty $. Do it up here. Then I don't remember if it's dot equals or equals dot. I just forget. I got it wrong. That or persistent overrode it. We'll find out in a moment. Nope, I got it wrong. Okay. So equals dot is persistent, and dot equals is ASON. Pretty silly feeling, but what are you going to do? And then we go ahead and do app, devel main, load, update, and we rerun this. Hey, what's going on here? Shouldn't this be an object? Change get, right? Gosh dang it. Well, now I need to figure out why it didn't change. Let's see here. Change to post. I don't think this is working at the moment. Postman, not the app. I think the app's fine. Because if I had changed it to post, it should have returned post counter, right? So I think something's wrong in this. I've never had Postman fail for me like this. That's really weird. Okay, we can use curl. That's fine. Yeah, there we go. It's fine in curl. I don't know what the hell's going on in Postman. That is really strange. Alright. Whatever. So here we see the proper JSON body, JSON object that we expected. Get counter wasn't edited. Oh, I know post wasn't. I was just trying to debug the Postman thing to see if it was actually sending the... That is exceptionally strange. It's just not sending the... It's just not sending the request for some reason. Wow, that is really weird. I've never seen it just straight up refuse to work before. Maybe it's specific to the Mac app. That was really strange. Alright. Alright. Guess I won't use Postman. And then if I do a post, I get post count R like I expected. So we'll just go ahead and give this the same treatment we gave. The other one, there we go. Alright, now they're both objects, which is a valid JSON response. Kareem says, I use Postman daily and it never failed before. I believe you. I've actually used Postman quite a bit, but I never used the Mac app before. It's always the Chrome application thing. And I'm guessing it's just the Mac app being flaky. It's usually not how things go, but I can see that happening when something was originally a Google Chrome app. This is probably just loading like a little Google Chrome window or something. The question is why. Good Lord. I really can't get it to... Man, that is so weird. Alright, sorry about that. Okay, so next thing we're going to do, got our little stubs there, is we're actually going to Alright, so what I just did here was I defined a table called counts, and it has two fields, key name and key count, and we're going ahead and deriving the show type class on it. You'll notice that when I ran update, it just went ahead and migrated it and created the table. Alright, so all I really want to do here is just create an endpoint that, given a database count, either returns the current value or increments it and returns the new value. So we're going to do either a read or an increment. Alright. So I usually use Escalito for everything, but I'm going to try to just do it in regular persistent. It shouldn't be too hard. So, oh, wrong update. I want to go back to API here. And then we're going to import model so that our model's in scope. And now update has a considerably different type. So what we're looking for here is, this is going to look a little silly, but you'll see monad.io, alright, so it's lifted, whatever, persist stored, persistent in the backend, Okay. All it's really saying is that given a key to a type, so if we do info counts, you'll see persist field, key counts, persistent entity counts. So the entity type is kind of a foundational data type in persistent. What it does is it abstracts the primary key out of your record type so that they are essentially a tuple that looks like this. So your primary key is in the left-hand side of the tuple, and then counts is just the two fields that we had in the model file, key name and key count. And when you look at the info for counts, you'll see that it's just the two fields we defined. But the entity field GDT has counts ID, counts key name, and counts key count, which is kind of awkward sounding, but you know, whatever. Okay, so one of the nice things about this is that, you know, a person can have a name with a string, and then a person can have a reference to a counts ID, which is just keeping a count of something. It could be a high score, it could be whatever, it doesn't really matter. And the library will actually keep track of the fact that this is a real thing, and it'll make a foreign key relationship out of it automatically and set the foreign key constraint in the migration and all that, if applicable for your database. That is one thing to keep in mind about persistent. It's not SQL specific. It's generalized over more than just SQL databases, which is why I use Escalito. Escalito isn't trying to generalize over MongoDB and, you know, SQL databases and just probably a few other things out there. I don't use Mongo, and I would probably sooner set myself on fire before use Mongo, so I don't have to worry about that. I don't care about that. To be clear, Escalito doesn't replace persistent. It's just a SQL query layer built on top of persistence model system. So what I'm saying is I don't usually use persistence query functions, but I definitely use, you know, all this stuff. All right, so getting back over, what we want to do is, all right, so we're going to go ahead and throw a do in there because we're going to be doing one thing in this, and I'm not going to manually bind it all. And then, what are we going to do? I think what we're going to do is get. So one problem with update and get is that they expect a primary key. We're not actually going to look something up by a primary key. We're going to look it up by a field. And I so rarely use the underlying persistent functions now because I've written helpers and wrappers over all of it. But we'll take a gander anyway and see what we dig up. Query combinator, Okay. Select list. That seems straightforward enough. Alright, so we're going to do get count by name. Is that a reasonable? Yeah, key name. Let's change to key name there. And then I don't actually want that to be a string. I want that to be text. Okay, text to and then it's going to be let me see here. Let's type of run DB. Okay. So I'm using a quick trick here for writing DB actions, but the way we do it in the real application at work is quite a bit different. I created constraint aliases and type aliases for all of this mess. Okay, so given a key name, we want to do select list, and then we've got a list of filters. Yeah, list of filters, and select options, and then we get a list of entities back. Alright, fair enough. So that's going to be a field name, which in this case, take a look at counts. This is actually pretty predictable based on the field names in your model file, but this is almost certainly what we want right here, counts key name. And then we want to say that it is equal to key name, and that's our only constraint. And we're not actually going to have any extra parameters there. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is a common problem where most query results return a list, and usually you're expecting 0 or 1, pretty much. So I think, yeah, so there's already a select first helper, so we're actually going to make this, we're going to change the type to maybe entity counts, and then we're going to change this to select first, and let's just see if that type checks. Handler.api can't match Yesod persistent backend with SQL backend. Yep, this is why I created those type aliases, because this is just dumb noise about the transformers. Can I drop this constraint? Yes. Okay. So, in the interest of preserving my sanity and yours, I will show you how to define such a thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to move this bad boy out into that. Reload. Variable not in scope site. May not need to do that. There we go. Now we have a nice little DB type, and all I did was create a couple of constraints. The only difference between these two, and again, this is a common Yesod pattern, you end up having kind of two of everything. You have one thing that knows about your site type, and you have one thing that doesn't. So in this case, DBM is polymorphic for the type of the site. It can be any Yesod app in the universe, and then DB here just happens to be our app specifically. The only difference between the two is that if we go back to our foundation module, if we had a database action that wanted to make use of something else from here, other than the connection pool, which is kind of a given, because that's getting routed through the database stuff anyway, like the app settings or something for some reason, shouldn't ideally, but just in case you did, you'd be able to, because you'd know that you were using the app type specifically. Whereas our little site type argument here is it's parametrically polymorphic. You don't know anything about it, so you can't do anything with that. So those are some common nice type aliases. Okay, so it's saying that get counts by key name works. Okay. All right. So next thing. One thing you'll notice is that run DB runs in a handler T. That is kind of annoying because if you try to do run DB get count by key name and then some key, that doesn't show, right? So you're not in GCI, you're in the IO monad. You're not in some wacky web app context. So this is another little helper thing. I usually end up creating a run dev DB helper, and it just goes ahead and supplies the default database config stuff, and it just kind of spins up a database connection so I can just talk to my dev database without having to try to figure out how to run it in the context of a web app. So in this case, we're just going to copy and paste this over, and I'm not going to need any of that. And in this case, this is a SQLite file. And we need the database persist SQLite stuff. So we bounce over to package, persistent SQLite, and we have to go back a version, 2 versions, 3 versions, 4 versions before Hackage has documentation. Because Hackage hates us or something. I don't know. Okay, so we're going to change this to with SQLite pool, I think. Yeah, there it is. Alright, with SQLite pool. And is there a connection string type? No? Okay. That's fine. And can change that. And I don't think there's going to be more. Number of connections to open. Just one. And it takes a text, which I imagine is just the file name rather than a full-blown connection name. And so we'll just get rid of that bad boy, and we don't need the asx because we're not doing this for re-exporting. And again, normally this wouldn't be part of my handlers module, nor would this would be in the helper module, but this is just for convenience, you can see it. Okay, connection pool to MA. So run SQLite. Is that the one? No, because it wants an action that takes a connection pool. Let's have a look at connection pool. Nope. Run SQLite. Connection string. Oh, run SQLite just takes the connection string and a database action. Oh, damn. Oh, this is the connection pool. Yeah, okay. Well, dang. So we're going to do list SQLite con, and that takes text and SQL backend. I think we can simplify this. Could be wrong, but I believe .io, logger. Yeah, it doesn't really care. It is a little bit strange that I can't find a runner that actually uses the connection pool in here. I'm guessing it's wrapping. Yeah, you're supposed to wrap the connection with a log func first. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take the easy way out because I don't have time to fiddle this till the end of time. But, you know, aspirations for later. And now it's complaining about run SQLite. That's fair enough. And now it's complaining that it's not a handler T. Secret says T, no logging T. Okay. So it's complaining that we didn't handle the logging component of this, which is fair enough, but you know, a little annoying when you're not really thinking about or caring about logging in a particular moment. So the Yesod scaffolds all use pretty standard logging stuff. We actually do something a little bit different at work, but that's alright. I'm just going to re-import the same stuff. Alright, now it's being cranky again. Indeed. Okay. Secret sys T, null T, resource T. Indeed. Alright. Actually, what we can do, we can track down how run DB is implemented. Try to see ourselves a little bit of time. Let's see how that goes. Run DB. Alright, it's in foundation. Foundation, just foundation. Okay. So it's running SQL pool, the action, and then appcom pool master. Import foundation and SQL pool. I'm pretty certain it's part of Yesod persist. Nope, I was wrong. It's coming from this guy. Alright. We'll just go ahead and dump that there. Reload. Yes. Okay, so when you want to just poke around and you want to ignore the thing you're doing that's failing, I usually just slap an undefined on it. I don't leave that in there for the actual app that runs. It's just there so I can speculate for a moment. And then, okay, yeah. So, run SQL pool takes SQL persist T, MA, and it just unwraps it into, yeah, it's just a reader T of a SQL backend. And then presumably you're running some kind of lifted IO to be able to actually run the SQL action. So it just wants a pool, connection pool for a SQL backend, and then it'll run your SQL. Fair enough. Alright. Now we don't have a connection pool, but we can make one. Next problem. Yeah, I think we can reuse this. So what we're going to do, the only app-specific component of this is that where it's getting the connection pool from is from master, and master is getting the Yesod app. So if you do the get the type get Yesod, it's just a reader for getting whatever your current app type value is. And just a reminder, that bad boy is right there, and that's what it's getting. That thing right there. So I'm going to try to reuse this. And alright. So we're not going to do that. We are going to use run SQL pool, and then we'll just go ahead and rename it to action so it looks more similar. And then the next part here needs to be the actual connection pool. Well, we did kind of figure out how to do that, right? So we have with SQLite pool. Let's go ahead and leave it undefined for a moment. Yes, I know. All right. SQLite pool. SQL pool. Yes. SQL persistent. Okay. Oh, you know what? Yeah, yes. I don't actually want that part in there. I think that's actually a lot of my problem. I was requiring it to have a Yesod app in there in the type, and I don't think that's strictly necessary. So let's double check my, yeah, it was more polymorphic than that. So I'm gonna just grab that bad boy. So what we're gonna do, so SQL persist-t is just a synonym for reader T SQL backend. So I'll just go ahead and replace that. And then we're gonna generalize the monad. And we're just gonna say that we need it to have monad IO, control IOM, type dbm, MA equals for all yeah, we don't actually care about that. I did that wrong. Sorry. Shouldn't actually know anything about the app. Whoops. Alright. That's fine though. We can fix it. This is a good time to ask me questions if you're not understanding what I'm doing. FYI. Reload. Illegal constraint. Use constraint kinds. With pleasure, sir. Yeah, not kids kinds. There we go. And reload. Okay, so let's get back to our little friend here. And we'll just get rid of the import constraint there. And unsql pool, action pool. Yes. Hey, it seems to work. All right, run devdb get count by key name. Blah. Nothing. Okay. So, alright, cool. We got a question. I'm excited. Alright, so let me explain what I did wrong here. So what I did wrong was I actually wrote my type synonyms wrong. Because the whole point of run devdb was that it would take a db action and turn it into an IO action so that I can just run it in GCI like this, right? Okay, here's the deal. If that's the whole point, if I ask for my little, monad that SQL persist-t is embedded inside of, because remember, the arguments to monad transformers are wrapped around that monad transformer, right? So if you have list t, maybe something, then you actually have a maybe of list. You don't have a list of maybe, right? So accordingly, if I'm asking for a handler t in here, then I have really fucked up because the whole point, again, of these types was just to make generic DB actions that didn't care about what monad they were in. So I want M here. I don't want handler T, because then I need to still run it in a web app. And I don't actually want to run a whole web app just to do a database query, right? Because I just want to poke at it when I'm developing in the REPL. And then, oh, yeah, so somebody provided the motivation for DBM and DB. Yeah, it's just so I don't have to write reader T, SQL backend, MA. Is that going to work? No, because it knows it's IO. So that's not going to work. I could probably do like monad IO M, and then I could lift it or something, but I mean, Christ, I don't want to write all that out every time, so I make a little type synonym here. And then control IO here is just a generalization of the two most common ways you lift things. So the reason I need constraint kinds is because control IO is not actually a type alias, it's actually constraint alias. And constraint kinds gives you the power to talk about things in other, control. If I get the kind, it should work. Oh, I need to reload maybe. Yeah, there we go. So constraint kinds let me create a constraint synonym that takes a monad of kind star to star, which all monads are, and it takes that like you would a higher order function kind of. And then instead of returning star, it returns constraint, which is a type class constraint. It's not actually a type, and you can see that here. I'm using it in the type class constraints of DBM. It's not actually on the right-hand side here at all. It's just a convenience. There are fancier ways to use constraint kinds. This is the only thing I ever use it for, just for creating aliases for long lists of effects, basically. All right, so now that we have a way to run our database queries, let's go ahead and create some data to query. So the reason for the DBM thing, just to make this point a little more visually obvious, you see this carnage here? You see that? That nightmare is because they aren't wrapping up the effect type or anything. And so the actual type of insert, yeah, so the actual type of insert is it's monad IOM, backend, which is actually a persist entity backend val, and I believe that's actually using the functional dependencies instance trick, and that's why it's using the type equality. And then it's asking for a persistent entity val, and then you're giving it some value that implements persistent entity val, and then it's figuring out how to resolve your backend based on the value and based on the persistent entity backend of the value. So it's expecting to be able to uniquely resolve what database or what kind of database the value is going to, just based on the type of the value itself. And then it just returns a database action that is reader T backend M. So what this is saying is it's a reader T, so it's a reader of what? Well, a reader T takes 3 arguments. It takes the thing you're reading in or the argument you're waiting for. That's backend. So it's waiting for the actual thing that lets it save stuff, because it can't do it until it has that. And then it's just abstracted for some monad that lets it lift IO actions, so it needs some monad that can eventually somehow do IO stuff. And then it's going to give you back the result is going to be the primary key of the value, because it can't give you that until it actually runs the IO action, inserts it in the database, gets a primary key back, and then you have your thing, right? So what has persistentity? Well, counts does, right? Because if we took a look at our instance list here, Where is it? Where is it? I think it's under entity, persist entity record. Yeah, so we're going to try insert counts, sample key, and we'll start it at 0, run devdb, bada bang, we inserted data. Now we can just keep doing this. Now we have a problem. We just inserted multiple things of with the same key, and now we have duplicate data, right? So if we do get count by key name, and then we do run devdb, and then example key, it just gives me the first one, but that's actually wrong. There's a bunch there. That's bad. So we should fix our model. So there's a thing in persistent, some syntax, for adding a unique foreign key constraint. And I just need to look it up, because I can remember. Wow, nobody does that. Don't do that. The only thing to keep in mind with the way this works is that you have to give the actual uniqueness foreign key constraint a name. So I usually just do unique, and then that has to be capitalized, keep in mind. Key name, or just the field name, and then you give it the actual factual key name, and then reload, and then I'm going to run app devel main, and we're going to see if it auto migrates it. Yeah, it's not going to. Wait, yeah, it didn't. So the auto migration failed because our data is actually incorrect already for the foreign key constraint. So we're going to use an old-fashioned trick for dealing with that problem. Old-fashioned trick. Don't tell anybody. All right. And we don't really need any of that stuff. Alrighty then. Alright, handler.api. Alrighty then. Run dev db, insert counts, and this time I'm actually going to get the key back. Sample key 0 to parentheses. No such table. Alright, I need to run the devel main so it creates it. There we go. And then reload that. And then rerun it. Okay, so now we have a count key. It's just a key of a counts row. Just a count. Really, it should be singular. That should be singular, and that's going to bother me until I fix it, so I'm just going to fix it. Alright, go back in the stack REPL, reload that, remigrate. Oh yeah, you can do, chat was talking about how to just construct keys out of nowhere. Let me fix the type here. There we go. Counts key name. Nope, it's just going to be count now. And then app, devel main, update, database migrated, reload handler.api, run dev db, and we're going to keep the key name, insert, count, example key, start with a count of 0. And okay, so we have key of count. If we take a look at the type of two-SQL key, you can take an int64 and just turn it into a key for a record. Now, there is a constraint, which Michael Borden helpfully mentioned. It has to be a key for a SQL backend. You can't assume that non-SQL databases will use N64 for the primary keys. The other thing to keep in mind is that even if you plan to use UUIDs as your primary keys, persistent is just going to have the N64 primary keys. There is a way to disable that. I can't be bothered. We actually use both at work. We use N64s internally for joins, and we use UUIDs for externally visible but non-enumerable primary keys into the database tables. Your mileage may vary. That's what we do. Okay, so now that we have a key, though, what that means, we can actually just use plain old get of count key 1, and then we can do run dev db of that, and hey, we get a row back, right? All right, cool. So what happens if we try to insert the same thing again? We get an exception. That's it. You get an exception. You have to handle that. So, you know, deal with it. All right. So, next thing is, all right, CC, just one quick note on that. So this manifested isn't just like a plain old IO style exception. You see how in DBM we have monad throw M? It's using that in order to throw the exception. You could actually, if you wanted to, you could wrap it in either, bifurcate it into left and right, handle the database exceptions there, so that the exceptions don't leak up if you want. You could do it pretty much however you want. All right, so now that we've done that, let's go ahead and write something that either creates or increments a count. So it's going to take a text, and it's going to return db entity count, create or increment, equals do, and I'm going to note something about transactions here in a moment. Let's say I have multiple database actions firing. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and bind the result of, we'll just use the proper function we made for this. Key name, there we go. Case, and then we don't actually have to give it an existing name like that. And then we're going to do something here, and we're going to do something here. So this is another common thing I do in production applications. I use the record wildcard syntax because it spares me having to manually enumerate the fields. It's not super compelling on something as small as count, but for bigger stuff, it's really nice. All right, so we have two different cases here. If the count doesn't already exist, what we should do is return, we should insert a new count with a key name and a starting value of 0. Get the count key back from that, and then return entity count key, and then we'll just call this count val. Count val. There we go. All right, and it's already complaining. Why is it? Oh, because it's entity. Nope. So whenever something's an entity, I usually put a prefix e in front of it, so I remember it's an entity and not the underlying value. Oh, it's still mad. Okay. Why is it mad? Oh, because I have to bind it. Oh, that's why I was doing that.
derp. There we go. All right, existing count. There we go. All right. Now we actually need the do. There we go. Compiles. Okay. So again, we're using undefined, and I think this strategy or tactic, I guess would be the proper word, tactic, for writing Haskell code is really important because it's letting me conquer my cases one at a time and letting the part that I actually care about type check first, which is really valuable. So I've dealt with the nothing case already. If an existing count isn't there, I create a default count with the key name that it's incrementing, started at 0. Actually, it's going to start at 1 because I'm incrementing it. Whoops. So I'm going to rename this to increment count to make the semantics a little clearer. There we go. All right. So we started at 1 because presumably if somebody calls us, they're incrementing it, right? We insert that and we kick it back out. All right. Now, I'll go ahead and comment on this before I get deeper in. So the important thing to remember here is that database, the DB type is a monad. And one of the nice things about persistent that I like is that it's transactional by design. So what that means is that this act of having taken get count by key name, done that, and then done an insert, that read and that write are done in the same database transaction. They are not run in separate database transactions. That is really important for correctness. One of the reasons I don't use PostgreSQL simple is that it's not really enough to do proper transactions unless you're going to shove everything you're doing into one big string blob or turn everything into stored procedures. I'm not going to do that. So there is PostgreSQL transactional, but it still has stringly queries, and I'm not doing stringly queries. I want my queries and my inserts and everything to be type checked. So I use persistent and Escalito instead. Okay, back to it. So in the case where we do already have a count, all we're really going to do, and we're not doing this the clever way, to be clear, we're really not. What we're going to do is get our count, and we're going to update, and actually, yeah, I think we can just do this in update and increment from there. And then we don't have to read it and then manually increment. On the other hand, the manual update's more generally useful. It makes more sense to beginners because they're going to have general updates that they want to do. Let's have a look at what they show us in persistent examples. Update person ID, so key, and then it sets a field. Yeah, there you go. There's your increment right there. Okay, so we're gonna get count key, and then our list of updates is just gonna be count key. I didn't rename that awkward. I didn't. Dang it. All right, so it's gonna be count key count. And then this is going to type check. Actually going to complain about indentation and mismatched brackets. Yeah, because I'm missing one right there. Yeah, so it's complaining that this returns unit. Yes. Yes, it does. So we still have to manually return. The issue here is that the new state of the entity is not what's in here because we just incremented it. So what we're going to do is manually reconstitute it. So So it's going to be entity count key count, and then we can actually just do, I think, count key name, and then count key count plus 1. It's not really ideal, but that's fine for quick demonstration. Okay, and now it type checks. Alright, so now what I can do is I can say increment and then Chris. Increment Chris. We're incrementing Chris now. Oh, but I have to load it first. Increment count. There we go. Hey, look at that. It's incrementing and it's unique now. Chris is incrementing. Cool beans, right? All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start actually doing stuff in our handlers. So the key thing to remember with transactions on persistent is that each invocation of run-db is a transaction. So if you do some stuff here, and then you do some stuff here, like that, these are two different transactions. Just the main thing to keep in mind. Alright, so get count by key name. Alright, so let's just go ahead and see if that type checks. Yes, it does. Because we have the ability to run DB, a DB action, because we're in the handler monad. Okay. So first things first is, where do we get our key name from? I'm going to say get param. Now I just need to remember where the damn get params come from, because I almost never use them in our work app. Get URL render. I don't think that's our winner. Alright, so we search for look up get param. There we go. Key name. Key. Okay, so look up get param. So it doesn't care what Yesod app you are actually using. It could be any Yesod app in the universe. You give it the param name, and then in the context of that Yesod app, it will give you maybe text. So what we're looking for is something like this on our URL. Like that. Right? Alright. Now, because it is maybe, so I'm going to put an M in front of that. M key name of nothing, undefined, just key name. Alright. So what I've done here, this type checks again. What I've done here is used undefined again. I went ahead and, implemented my happy path here, right? And I already know this type check, so I just need to handle my not happy path. And we're going to use send response status and status. This is a 400, right? Because it's invalid request, I think. And then that. Oh, it's mad. Okay, so here's another one to keep in mind. When you see no instance for isString C0, blah, 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 here's the key element that you need to know. Type variable is ambiguous. It's because you have overloaded strings. Just pick a type. Any type. There you go. Not any type. Sorry. Shouldn't actually be any type. It's just a text value. Alright. There we go. So now get count is implemented. So we're going to go ahead and go back to app devel main, update, and we're going to run this bad boy. API v1 count. Okay, so when I went to API v1 count with no get parameter, it complained. It said invalid request must include key name and get parameters. Well, yes, that's right. And what if I say key equals Chris? Well, it succeeds, but my response is still the little default thing, right? So we're going to change the response to return an object of your key name, and then we're going to get the count out of this. Dun, dun, dun. And then count key count. So we're just binding the entity out of run.db here. Handler.api. Maybe, right? Because it can be maybe, right? Okay, so what we're going to do is just Control W that out. We're going to say maybe count, case maybe count of nothing. This one's actually easy. It's just 404, not found. And then we go ahead and dump that bad boy in there. Dump that up. Text with actual type int. You are right. Right you are. Right you are. Oh, scientific. Alright. What if I don't use the constructor? Yeah. That's cool. Alright. So if I don't use the explicit number constructor from the JSON value type, then it just takes advantage of the toJSON instance for the right-hand side of this little dot equals thing. And then app, develop main. Did I not? Did I not run update? Yeah, there we go. And now we have our data. Little JSON body of Chris is 8. And that's what I remember from the REPL, right? Alright, so now that's done. Cool, right? Yeah, cool. Alright, so now we're going to give post count the same treatment. Same deal. It's so much fun doing the exact same stuff on Sunday that I do for my job. I'm going to wake up tomorrow and I'm going to do all the same stuff. It's going to be awesome. Alright, so increment count. Okay, so first things first. New count. Alright, so I need to handle this one a little bit differently. In this case, what we're dealing with is what is ostensibly a JSON endpoint. And alright, so generally when you post against a JSON endpoint, you have a couple different options of way you can take input. You could take it form encoded, which would be a little weird since it's a JSON endpoint. You could take the input as part of the path. I'm not going to do that. This is a post on the same routes, so that would be a different route if I did that. Or you just expect them to post a JSON body. Well, we can do that. So I'm just going to make a data type, count increment requests, and it's going to derive eq generic show instance from JSON, count increment request, acquire JSON body, and This suffers from the ambiguous type class thing as well, so you want to have some kind of explicit way for it to know what the type is, like that. And then we just want the key name, right? So count key. We don't want to call this count key name because the count type already has that, so we're gonna call it increment key name text. And I reload that. Seems to have worked. So what this has permitted me to do, really? Decode's not in, come on. Okay, so what it's permitted me to do is to accept JSON in the form of count increment request. Let's see if I can guess what this is going to be. Yeah, why isn't decode in scope? That's really weird. There we go. Okay, decode. And then maybe count increment request. Nothing. Okay. And what if it is increment key name? Like that. There we go. So it expects an object with a field increment key name and a text value. And it works fine. So I'm just going to put string on, whoops, that, so I have the non-escaped version. And for documentation, let's dump that there. Although if I change the data type, that'll become a lie. Alright, so now we have an increment key name, a new count, increment key name equals entity count key count load type checked. So there we go. Lexi commented, Yesod seems to be nicer than he thought. Yeah, I mean, I'm comfortable with it though. You're watching somebody who's spent, I don't know, a couple years using Yesod, year and a half professionally. So I know a lot of shortcuts and just kind of what parts to ignore and not use, like auth. So I wouldn't underestimate how frustrating, kind of wheel spinning it can be for beginners if they don't know what parts to kind of pick and choose from. And mostly that's because I think there haven't been enough contributors to kind of help refine the UX and kind of defaults around Yesod. I think if there were more companies and individuals using Yesod and kind of kicking in, it would help smooth and sand down those rough edges. I tried to do some of that. I posted some changes to Yesod test recently so that it actually like shows predefined versions of the assertion values that you said were equal. Instead of just saying assertion failed, you actually see which values it's talking about and everything. Is Yesod book mandatory for beginners? So how do I explain this? You're probably going to have to reference Yesod book. It's not an end-to-end read at all. Example code will get you a lot further and faster, like what I'm writing right here. And by the way, what I'm doing with this is all open source. When I'm done streaming tonight, this is all going to get pushed. You can get this code and go get it from the Git repo yourself. You don't have to try to reconstitute this manually. And this is not the sort of thing that I would consider worth trying to recreate manually. This is just dumb schlep. This is not worth trying to recreate yourself. Anyway, yeah, you can just, I mean, again, I haven't pushed in 8 days. I am at the end of this, and you can go get it, and then you'll have the example code. But yeah, so to answer Lexi's question, yeah, you'll reference the Yesod book, and you saw me referencing it when I was looking at the persistent stuff to remind myself what the functions were and how to use them. That was just, you know, I'll just use it as reference. That's all I've ever done with the Yesod book, and that's how most people I know use it. And Lexi commented GCJS took 1.5 hours to compile. Yes. Yeah, it will. The good news is you don't actually have that many versions of it running around, so that shouldn't happen again for a while until Lauda pushes up something big. But yeah, we actually use a custom patch GCJS compiler at work most of the time, mostly for silly little stuff like the linker, oddly enough. Anyway, all right, so now we need to test this, right? So, can I remember even how to curl post something? Curl x post, and then something to pass data. Is it D? D for data? App development, update. This is gonna work the first time I know it. API view1 counts. Hey, I remembered it the first time. Look at that. Huh? Cool, right? All right, so we have a simple little API counter. Sorry, Simon just he just said in all caps, I didn't miss the streams this time. And you kind of misspell it, almost kind of lolcatty. And he's got a very goobery Avi. It's pretty funny. Jesus. I may screenshot that for Twitter later. All right. So, yeah. So now we have a working little example API endpoint. And again, this is pretty important in my opinion because while I do use Yesod so that I can make the occasional form and traditional web app template driven web application, I use Yesod because I could do API style and traditional web app style in the same backend application, and I don't have to feel like I'm fighting upstream, right? But the reason I think it's important to have an API example somewhere in a scaffold is because that's, again, where a lot of web applications are moving. Most companies have a fair few JavaScript programmers who do nothing but write, you know, single-page application-style apps in cooperation with the back-end devs. So back-end, as far as making a web app as back-end, it's kind of debatable, but anyway. So, yeah. All right, this works. I'm just gonna dump that bad boy in there to save somebody else the trouble. All right, let's commit what I've got so far. So first things first, you can see SQLite popped up here. So we're gonna do glob SQLite 3. I don't actually really ever want to accidentally check in something from that. And we're gonna go ahead and add that. And added sample accounts API. Push. Cool. Alright. And then Michael Borden, I want to comment on this. So Michael Borden said I wasn't familiar with the bind to record syntax. So that's actually the cool thing. This isn't specific to bind. This is just me being lazy. So this is still the same wildcard record syntax that lets you essentially glob or expand and dump all of the record fields into scope. It's just that I happen to be doing it for the result of bind, and then the result of a bind, and then the kicker is that I'm not doing it just to bring stuff into scope. I'm doing it so that it knows what type this is, so that I don't, because if it looked, let me show you what the alternative would look like. So if I name it, you know, increment request or something, that means I have to now do, unless there's more type information down here later, which there may be, but unless there's more type information down here later, then I have to do like that to let it know what type it is, right? Now, I could do it like this, and then that would work, I'm pretty sure. Let me reload. So I'd have to do like that, and then that works. But that's noisier. I don't like noisy, and I'm really lazy, so I don't do things like that. Instead, I do it like that. Okay, go ahead and clean up the warnings. It's saying I don't use eCount. Fair enough. The import of model in the API is redundant. Fair enough. All right, let's go ahead and do a stack build. See what our warnings look like. I'm sure we'll assuredly have something. Or not. No warnings. Ah, here's a good error. So you'll sometimes get these mystifying linker errors about undefined symbols, missing, yada, yada, yada. I can make this a lot simpler for you. You see how it's got some name mangling in there, but you see how you have like handler, API, get count R, handler, API, post count R. Yeah, so probably didn't add it to the exposed modules. Yep, I didn't. My bad. So, remember I said about if it doesn't look like a compiler error, it's probably, you know, Cabal, package YAML, whatever. That's a linker error, not a compiler error. So, we're going to run that again. And by the way, this is why we rerun the whole build before we call it a day. Now it's good. There we go. Cool. So the next step for me, personally, in this little example project, and everything I just did is pushed up now, so that's all available. Next step for me is to make a basic AJAX call that pulls the CSRF token from the CSRF token bootstrap from the default layout wrapper, probably from the home page, and then add a little button that invokes the AJAX function, bumps the count, and then the GCGS code dumps the new count somewhere in the DOM, and it pulls the key name from a user input. Just a very simple, raw little JS widget. I'm not going to do that right now because it's 10 p.m. where I am. So I'm going to call it a night. I'm going to give the people in chat a minute to come up with questions if they have any. And if nobody has any questions, I'll call it a night. Otherwise, I'll answer the question. Anybody got anything? Oh, you know what? Hey, even if people don't have questions, I think I owe at least one person some dog time. So let the dogs of war come over here. Come here. Come here, boys. Come here. Here we go. Here we go. All right. We'll do one dog at a time. This is Jack. Hi, buddy. Hi, buddy. Oh, I know this is distressing. I'm sorry. Here you go. Hi, buddy. Yeah. Here's your good dog. Here's your good boy. Yes. All right, Jack. I'm gonna let you down now, okay? All right. There you go. And then Papu, who is a slightly smaller big baby. You can just straight up pick him up. Oh, Papu. Yes. Papu. Belly. I got your belly. Yeah, Jack's doing great now. He's a good weight. He's all healed up. He doesn't have that open gash anymore. He doesn't, as far as I know, have heartworm, although we have to do the 6-month confirmation on that. And his hip's in good shape. He runs around more than Papu does, despite having basically no hip joint anymore. Yeah, Jack's doing great. It's a good, healthy dog now. Yes. And Papu's very hell-bent on becoming unhealthy because he just eats so much. All right, there you go. He doesn't move. All right. Enough of the dogs. Yay, God time. All right. Any questions, anyone? Yeah, Papu doesn't always tolerate me holding him like a baby. Sometimes he pretty quickly scrambles out of there. No questions? I'm going to give you all like 30 more seconds. So if you're formulating a question, let me know. Dog's licking my leg. Thank you, Papu. That's definitely what I needed. Yeah, you're welcome. Happy to stream. It's just kind of a nice way from doing stuff like this to be more interesting because it's really hard for me personally to get up the motivation to work on examplers or little tutorial stuff like this when the book still isn't done. I did, about 4 hours of work on that earlier today, but it's more fun and more interesting for me if I'm talking through what I'm doing and answering questions and stuff. And the more people ask questions and interact, the more fun it is. So please feel free to ask any questions, not just now, but during the middle of a future stream. I'm sure I'll do another one eventually. And it sounds like nobody has any questions, so I'll call it a night. And if you change your mind and you decide you did have a question, just go ahead and hit me up on Twitter. Good night, everyone. Good night.